The Great Hall of Varanthos Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, carved from living crystal that hummed with ancient energy. 12 different species had gathered here for thousands of years to decide the fate of worlds, to end wars, and to shape the future of civilizations. Today, for the first time in galactic history, humans stood in this sacred place. Ambassador Laura Mitchell walked slowly toward the center of the circular chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the vast silence. She wore a simple dark blue uniform with the emblem of the United Earth Federation on her shoulder. Behind her walked Admiral Kevin Brooks, a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, and Dr. Hannah Price, whose knowledge of alien cultures had made this moment possible. Around them, seated on platforms that floated at different heights, were the representatives of the Galactic Council. The Dravati beings made of living crystal that glowed with inner light occupied the highest platform. The Morthani, insect-like creatures with 6 limbs and compound eyes, clicked their mandibles impatiently. The Silurians, gentle beings that resembled Earth's octopuses but moved through the air on invisible currents, watched with what might have been curiosity or concern the Dravati High Speaker. A massive crystalline entity named Zelvareth rose from his throne. Light passed through his body, creating rainbows that danced across the chamber walls. His voice, when he spoke, seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Humanity," he said, and the word carried the weight of judgment. "You have been permitted to enter these halls. You should feel honored. Many species wait centuries for such an invitation. You have waited only 300 years since discovering faster-than-light travel. We have decided to be generous." Laura kept her expression neutral. She had been warned about Dravati arrogance. Their species had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years. They had never known defeat, never bent to another power. To them, every other species was either a servant or a future servant. "We are grateful for the invitation," Laura replied carefully. "The United Earth's Federation seeks peaceful cooperation with all species." Zelvareth made a sound that the translation device interpreted as laughter, though there was no warmth in it. "Peace. Yes, you humans speak often of peace. Yet our records show your history. You have spent most of your existence killing each other. World wars, genocides, nuclear weapons used against your own kind. You are perhaps the most violent species ever to achieve space travel." Laura felt Kevin tense beside her, but she kept her voice calm. "We do not deny our past. We have learned from it, have you?" The Dravati High Speaker's crystal form pulsed with cold light. "Then you will have no objection to the terms we have prepared." A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a map of human space. The Orion Spur, where humanity had built its colonies and established its presence among the stars, glowed blue against the darkness. "You will reduce your colonial holdings by 60%, Zelvareth announced. "The systems marked in red will be surrendered to Council administration. Your military fleet will be reduced to 100 vessels, all of which will be inspected annually by Council observers. Your weapons research programs will be terminated, and for the next 500 standard cycles, your species will pay tribute to this Council as compensation for the resources you have taken from systems that rightfully belong to us." The chamber fell silent. Laura stared at the map, at the colonies that would be lost, the billions of human lives that would be disrupted. This was not negotiation. This was surrender. "These terms," she said slowly, "were not discussed in our preliminary communications." The Morthani delegate leaned forward, its compound eyes reflecting Laura's image 1,000 times. "Preliminary communications served their purpose. They brought you here. Now you will accept what is offered or you will face consequences." Hannah Price stepped closer to Laura and whispered, "They planned this from the beginning. The trade agreements, the cultural exchanges, everything. They were mapping our defenses, identifying our weaknesses." Laura had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow. She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Some, like the Salorians, seemed uncomfortable with what was happening. Others, like the Morthani, watched with obvious pleasure. But none spoke against the Dravati. None offered support. I need to consult with my government, Laura said. We request a recess of 48 standard hours. Zelvreth's form flickered with irritation. You have 12 hours. Use them wisely. When you return, you will sign the agreement, or we will consider your refusal an act of war. The floating platforms began to drift away as the council delegates departed. Laura remained standing in the center of the chamber, watching them go. When the last one had disappeared through the crystal archways, she finally allowed herself to breathe. That went well, Kevin said dryly, in the quarters assigned to the human delegation. A small suite of rooms in a tower overlooking the station's artificial ocean. Laura paced while Kevin and Hannah worked. Kevin had pulled up holographic displays showing the positions of both human and council military forces. The numbers were not encouraging. Hannah was analyzing every word spoken in the chamber, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. They have us outgunned 50-1, Kevin said. If we fight them directly, we lose. There's no scenario where conventional warfare works in our favor. Then we do not fight conventionally, Laura replied. Hannah looked up from her work. The Solarians seemed uncomfortable, and the Veluxi delegate would not meet my eyes. Not all council members support this action. It does not matter if none of them speak against it. Laura stopped pacing and stared out the window at the artificial stars that lit the station ceiling. We knew this might happen. President Hayes authorized Project Lighthouse before we left Earth. The question is whether we have the courage to use it. She activated the quantum communicator, a device that allowed instantaneous communication across any distance. President Daniel Hayes appeared on screen, his face tired but determined. He had been watching the council session through Laura's hidden camera. I saw everything, he said. The Security Council has already met. We are unanimous, Laura. Pull out. They will see it as an act of war. Sir, they declared war the moment they decided to trap us with false promises. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers across the vast distance between them. Bring our people home. Project Lighthouse is a go. And Laura, make sure they understand something before you leave. What is that, sir? Make sure they understand that they made a mistake. Not us, them. Laura ended the communication and turned to face Kevin and Hannah. Both of them looked back at her with expressions of grim resolve. They had all known this moment might come. They had hoped it would not. But humanity had not survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the silence of the cosmos by backing down when threatened. Pack your things, Laura said. We leave in 1 hour, and I have a message to record. Outside the window, the artificial stars continued to shine, beautiful and false. Somewhere beyond them, the real stars waited. Humanity had claimed its place among them through blood and sacrifice. They would not give that up without a fight. The Galactic Council had lived in peace for thousands of years. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that refused to. Surrender. They were about to remember. The morning after the failed negotiations, the council delegates gathered in the Great Hall expecting to witness human submission. They had done this many times before with other species. The pattern was always the same. A young civilization would resist at first, make bold statements about sovereignty and independence, and then, faced with the overwhelming might of the council, they would bend. They always bent. The Dravati High Speaker Zelvareth took his place on the highest platform, his crystalline form glowing with satisfied anticipation. The Morthani delegate clicked its mandibles in what passed for a smile among its species. Even the usually reserved Veluxi had gathered to watch what they assumed would be an entertaining display of human desperation. But when the doors opened, no humans entered. The chamber remained empty. The space where Laura Mitchell had stood just hours before now held nothing but silence. Zelvreth waited for 1 minute.
Ow.
Then 2. His crystal form began to pulse with irritation. Where are they? He demanded. Bring them here immediately. A council servant, a small gray creature whose species had served the Dravati for millennia, scurried forward. High Speaker, the human delegation departed the station during the night cycle. Their vessel jumped to faster than light speed before we could respond. The announcement sent a ripple of shock through the assembled delegates. Species did not simply leave Varanthos Prime without permission. It had never happened in the entire history of the Council, before Zelvereth could respond. Every screen in the chamber flickered to life. Laura Mitchell's face appeared, calm and composed, against a background of stars. This message is addressed to the Galactic Council and to every species within range of this transmission, she began. The United Earth Federation came to Varanthos Prime with hope in our hearts. We believe that the ancient civilizations of this galaxy would welcome us as partners. We believe that the invitation to negotiate was genuine. We were wrong. Laura's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath her words. What we found instead was a trap. The Council did not invite us to negotiate. They summoned us to surrender. They demanded that we abandon our colonies, destroy our defenses, and submit to 5 centuries of tribute. They offered us slavery wrapped in diplomatic language. Around the chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably. Several of them had opposed the Dravati plan in private discussions, but none had found the courage to speak against it publicly. Humanity will not accept these terms, Laura continued. We will not bow to threats. We will not surrender our children's future to satisfy the arrogance of those who believe that age alone grants the right to rule. Therefore, the United Earth Federation formally withdraws from all negotiations with the Galactic Council. We withdraw from all treaties, all agreements, and all obligations. From this moment forward, any Council vessel that enters human space without permission will be considered hostile. The message paused, and when Laura spoke again, her voice had softened slightly. We did not want this. We came seeking friendship, and we found only contempt. The responsibility for what follows lies with those who chose to threaten rather than welcome, to dominate rather than cooperate. History will judge us all. The screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Zelvereth's crystal form cracked with the sound of breaking glass, a sign of extreme rage among his species. Find them, he roared. Send pursuit vessels. They cannot have gone far. But tracking reports came back empty. The human ship had vanished into the vastness of space, its trail already cold. The Morthani delegate rose on its 6 legs. High Speaker, we must respond with overwhelming force. Send the fleet. Crush their homeworld before they can prepare defenses. The Morthani speak wisdom, agreed the Veluxi representative, a being composed of interconnected spheres that floated in precise formation. Strike now, strike hard. End this, before it begins. But the Solarian ambassador, Velith, raised a tentacle in caution. Perhaps we should reconsider. The humans have proven surprisingly capable in past encounters. Their defeat of the Corvin Raiders, their expansion through the Orion Spur, these were not the actions of a weak species. Oh. The Corvin were pirates and scavengers, Zelvereth dismissed. We are the Galactic Council. We command more military might than any force in history. This rebellion will be crushed within a single standard year. The vote was called. 11 species voted for war. Only the Solarians abstained, though even they did not vote against. The motion passed with overwhelming support. Within hours, mobilization orders went out to 7 member species. Ships that had not flown in combat for centuries were activated. Weapon systems that had grown dusty from disuse were tested and prepared. The largest military force ever assembled began gathering at the edge of human space. 342 warships. Enough firepower to crack planets open like eggs. Crews that had trained their entire lives for battles that never came, now eager to prove themselves against an enemy they considered barely worthy of their attention. On the Council homeworld, crowds gathered to watch the departure of the fleet. This would be entertainment, they believed. A quick war against a primitive species, something to break the monotony of eternal peace. The Dravity High Speaker addressed his people from the steps of the Grand Temple. Today we remind the galaxy why the Council has ruled for 40,000 years. Today we teach humanity the lesson that every young species must learn. There is no place for defiance in our galaxy. There is only submission or extinction. The crowds cheered. The fleet departed. And across the gulf of space, humanity watched them come, in a bunker deep beneath the surface of Mars. President Daniel Hayes met with his war council. Admirals, generals, scientists, and strategists filled the room, their faces lit by the glow of tactical displays showing the approaching enemy force. "They outnumber us badly," Admiral Kevin Brooks reported. "Direct confrontation would be suicide. But that was never our plan." Hannah Price stepped forward to the central display. "Project Lighthouse is fully operational. All civilian populations have been evacuated from border systems. Defense platforms have been set to automated mode. When the Council fleet arrives, they will find empty space." "Empty space? And nothing more?" asked one of the generals. Hannah smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "They will find exactly what we want them to find. And they will learn that humanity does not fight wars the way they expect." Daniel Hayes looked around the room at the men and women who would guide humanity through the storm to come. They were afraid he could see that. But they were also determined. Humanity had faced extinction before. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, diseases that killed millions, nuclear weapons that could have ended everything. They had survived it all. They would survive this too. "Give the order," Daniel said. "Let them come. And when they think they have one, we will show them what humans are truly capable of." The Council fleet crossed into human space, expecting glory. They would find something very different waiting for them in the darkness between the stars. The Council fleet swept into human space like a great wave, expecting to crash against the rocks of resistance and wash away everything in its path. Instead, they found nothing. Admiral Zarath of the Dravati hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crystal Vengeance, watching his tactical display with growing confusion. His fleet had taken the first human colony world, a planet called New Portland, without firing a single shot. The cities were empty. The defense platforms floated silent and powered down. Not a single human ship had risen to meet them. "This is wrong," his second officer observed. "They should be fighting." Every intelligence report said humans would fight to the death to defend their territory. "Perhaps they are wiser than we thought," Zorath replied, though doubt had begun to creep into his crystalline mind. Perhaps they realized resistance was futile. The fleet pressed on, taking system after system with the same ease. 5 colonies fell in the first week, then 10, then 20. Each time, they found the same thing: empty buildings, abandoned ships, equipment left behind, as if the humans had simply vanished into the void. On the Council homeworld, celebrations erupted. The war was already being declared a victory. Zelvarith gave speeches about the swift and righteous defeat of the human rebellion. Artists created works commemorating the conquest. Children were taught songs about the foolish young species that had dared to defy the natural order. But Admiral Zorath felt no joy. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his crystalline bones, a vibration that warned of danger he could not see. On the 17th day of the invasion, the first supply convoy disappeared, 23 cargo vessels carrying food. Fuel and ammunition for the advancing fleet simply stopped transmitting. Search parties found nothing. Not debris, not distress signals, not even the residual energy signatures that would indicate destruction. The ships had simply ceased to exist. 3 days later, a second convoy vanished. Then a third. Zorath ordered the fleet to halt its advance. "Something is hunting us," he reported to Zelvarith. "We are being picked apart like prey animals." The High Speaker dismissed his concerns. "Continue the advance. Find their homeworld. End this." But ending it was no longer so simple. Deep in the asteroid belt of an unnamed system, Admiral Kevin Brooks watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Around him, in hollowed-out rocks that sensors could not distinguish from natural formations, humanity's real fleet waited. "Third convoy confirmed destroyed," Commander Lisa Cortez reported. "No survivors, no witnesses. The Morthani escort never even saw us coming," Kevin nodded. "What is the status of the jamming network?" "Fully operational. The Morthani fleet elements are completely cut off from their hive mind coordination. Their commanders are having to make independent decisions for the first time in their species' history. This was the heart of Project Lighthouse. Humanity had known they could not match the Council in direct combat, so they had chosen not to fight directly at all. Instead, they had spent decades studying their potential enemies, learning their weaknesses, developing weapons and tactics designed specifically to exploit those weaknesses. The Morthani were a hive-mind species. Every soldier, every pilot, every commander was connected to a central intelligence that coordinated their actions with perfect efficiency. Cut that connection, and the individual Morthani became confused, indecisive. Unable to function effectively, human jamming technology had been developed in secret, tested in simulation, and deployed the moment the Council fleet crossed into human space. Now, Morthani units throughout the invasion force were falling into chaos, but that was only the beginning. On a dozen worlds behind enemy lines, human strike teams emerged from hiding. They had been in place for months, waiting for this moment. Their targets were not military installations, but infrastructure, power plants, communication relays, food distribution centers, the systems that kept the Council's vast civilization running. They struck with surgical precision, appearing from nowhere, completing their missions, and vanishing before anyone could respond. No civilians were harmed. No unnecessary destruction was caused. But world after world went dark, their populations suddenly facing shortages of things they had taken for granted for millennia. Panic began to spread through Council space. Species that had known only comfort and security for thousands of years suddenly found themselves vulnerable. Lights that had never failed now flickered and died. Supplies that had always arrived on schedule now never came at all, and in the darkness, humans whispered a message that spread from world to world. The Council cannot protect you. The Council lied to you. The Council brought this upon you. Admiral Zorath received new orders from Zelvareth. Press forward at all costs. Find and destroy the human homeworld. That will end their resistance. But pressing forward had become dangerous. Every jump into a new system might be an ambush. Every asteroid field might hide enemy ships. Every convoy might be the next to vanish. The Dravati had another weakness that humanity had discovered through years of careful research. Their crystalline bodies were vulnerable to specific resonance frequencies. Dr. Hannah Price had developed weapons that could exploit this vulnerability. Devices that generated vibrations capable of shattering Dravati from the inside out. The first time these weapons were used, an entire Dravati battle group was destroyed in minutes. Thousands of crystalline warriors simply cracked and fell apart, their internal light fading as their bodies collapsed into fragments. Zorath watched the recording of the battle with horror. His species had believed themselves invincible. They had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years based on that belief. Now, in a flash of terrible light, that belief had been proven wrong. "Hi, Speaker," he transmitted to Zelvareth. "I must recommend withdrawal. The humans have developed weapons specifically designed to kill us. They have been planning this for decades. This is not a war we can win through force alone." Zelvareth's response was immediate and furious. Withdrawal is not an option. The Council does not retreat. The Council does not surrender. Press forward, or I will have you replaced. So Zorath pressed forward, and the fleet continued to die. One by one, member species of the Council began to question the war. The Veluxi, who had lost a quarter of their fleet to ambushes, requested permission to withdraw. The request was denied. The Tharkin, whose supply lines had been completely severed, reported that their crews were beginning to starve. No help was sent. 6 months after the invasion began, the Council fleet had conquered every human colony in the Orion Spur. They had captured empty cities and abandoned stations. They had planted their flags on silent worlds, and they had lost more ships, more soldiers, more resources than in any war in galactic history. Humanity had not been defeated. They had simply refused to be where the Council expected them to be. And while the Council fleet chased shadows through empty space, humanity had been bleeding them dry, one cut at a time. The galaxy was beginning to realize that this war would not be quick. It would not be easy, and it might not end the way anyone had expected. on Earth had never been attacked. President Daniel Hayes addressed his people. We have survived the first wave. We have proven that we cannot be conquered by force alone. Now we enter the second phase of this war. Now we show the galaxy what humanity truly fights for. Not conquest, not revenge, but the right to exist on our own terms, among the stars we have earned. The war was far from over. But for the first time, the Council had begun to understand what they were truly facing. Not a primitive species to be crushed and forgotten, but an enemy that had been preparing for this moment for generations, an enemy that intended to win. 8 months into the war, Ambassador Velith of the Silurian Collective made a decision that would have been unthinkable just 1 year before. She activated a secret communication channel that bypassed all Council monitoring systems and sent a message to the last known location of the human resistance. 3 days later, she received a response. The meeting took place on a frozen moon orbiting a dead star, a location so remote that no Council patrol would ever think to look there. Velith arrived alone, her tentacles wrapped around herself for warmth in the thin atmosphere. She waited in the shadow of an ancient crater. Watching the stars wheel overhead, a human shuttle descended through the darkness without running lights. Landing so softly that it barely disturbed the frost beneath it, Laura Mitchell emerged, accompanied by 2 guards who kept their weapons holstered, but visible. Ambassador Velith, Laura said. This is unexpected. I imagine it is. Velith's translator rendered her clicks and whistles into weary English. 6 months ago, I would have called this meeting treason. Now I am no longer certain what that word means. They walked together across the frozen surface, their breath forming clouds that crystallized and fell like snow. The guards followed at a respectful distance. Why are you here? Laura asked. Velith was silent for a long moment. The Silurians have records of your species dating back to your first radio transmissions. We have watched you for nearly 400 years. We watched you wage war against yourselves, destroy your own cities, and poison your own world. We watched you nearly exterminate yourselves a dozen times over. That is not exactly a flattering portrait. No, but we also watched what came after. We watched you rebuild. We watched you heal your damaged planet. We watched you reach for the stars despite every setback. And we watched you do something that no other species in galactic history has ever done. What is that? Velith turned to face her, and Laura could see something like wonder in the alien's large, liquid eyes. You learned from your mistakes. Other species repeat their errors endlessly. The Dravati have been making the same mistakes for 40,000 years. The Morthani cannot even conceive of changing their ways. But humans, somehow you keep finding new ways to be better than you were. Laura did not know what to say. She had expected demands, conditions, perhaps a trap. She had not expected this, we warned them, Velith continued. When the Council first discussed taking action against humanity, the Silurians advised caution. We told them that a species capable of surviving itself was not to be underestimated. They did not listen. And now? Now the Council is fracturing. The Veluxi have lost half their fleet. The Tharkin are openly discussing withdrawal regardless of Zelvrit's orders. The Morthani hive mind has developed something it has never experienced before, fear. And the Dravati have learned that they can be killed. Laura absorbed this information. Are you here to negotiate a separate peace? I am here because I believe the old order is dying. Velith's tentacles waved in a gesture that the translator could not interpret. For 10,000 years, the Council has maintained stability through domination. Any species that grew too powerful was crushed. Any technology that threatened the balance was suppressed. It was not justice. It was control disguised as order. Many species benefited from that order. Many more suffered under it. The Silurians, remember, we were not always Council members. Once, we were like you, a young species that dared to dream too boldly. The Dravati broke us. They destroyed our homeworld and scattered our people across the galaxy. We survived only by surrendering completely, by becoming useful to our conquerors. Laura felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frozen moon. I did not know. Now, if you do? The Council controls history. They decide what is remembered and what is forgotten. Velith moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But now there are whispers throughout the galaxy. Species that have served the Council for ages are watching your resistance with new eyes. You have shown them something they had forgotten was possible. That the strong can be defeated. That empires can fall. That the future does not have to look like the past. The implications of what Velith was suggesting were staggering. This was not just about ending the current war. This was about reshaping galactic civilization itself. Ambassador, Laura said carefully, if you are suggesting an alliance, you need to understand what that would mean. The Dravati would not forgive such a betrayal. You would be making an enemy of the most powerful force in the galaxy. The Dravati are no longer the most powerful force in the galaxy. Velith's voice carried certainty that surprised them both. They simply do not know it yet. They talked for 3 more hours, 2 representatives of species separated by biology, history, and culture, finding common ground in their shared desire for a better future. By the time the sun began to rise over the frozen horizon, they had outlined the framework of something that had never existed before. Not an empire built on conquest, not a council maintained through fear, but a true alliance of equals, species working together, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. There are others who feel as I do, Velith said as they prepared to depart. The Veluxy ambassador has expressed doubts. The Tharkin have been quietly reaching out to neutral species. Even some Morthani queens have begun questioning the hive mind's loyalty to the council. Then we need to give them something to rally around, Laura replied. Not just victory in this war, but a vision of what comes after. A reason to believe that the risk of standing against the Dravati is worth taking. On the council homeworld, Zelvareth received reports that filled his crystalline form with cracks of stress. The war that was supposed to be over in months had dragged on for nearly a year. Human forces now operated openly behind council lines, striking targets that should have been untouchable. And worst of all, his own allies were beginning to waver. The Veluxy demand a summit to discuss the war's progress, his advisor reported. The Tharkin have recalled their remaining fleet for defensive purposes. And there are reports of unauthorized communications between multiple council species and unknown parties. Traitors, Zelvareth hissed. They are all traitors. But even as he spoke, he knew that the problem was deeper than betrayal. The council had built its power on the assumption that no enemy could threaten it. Now that assumption had been proven false. And once a species learned that gods could bleed, they stopped worshipping. President Daniel Hayes addressed the Federation from the steps of the rebuilt United Nations headquarters in Geneva. Behind him stood representatives of every nation on Earth, united as they had never been before. For 8 months, we have fought a war we did not start against enemies who sought to enslave us. We have suffered losses. We have made sacrifices. But we have not been broken, and we will not be broken. Today, I can tell you that the tide is turning. Not just because of our military successes, but because of something far more important. We are no longer alone. He paused, letting the words sink in. Across the galaxy, species are beginning to see what we have always known. That freedom is worth fighting for. That no one has the right to rule others simply because they are older or stronger. That the future belongs to those brave enough to imagine it differently. In the bunker beneath Mars, Laura Mitchell watched the broadcast with hope she had not allowed herself to feel for months. The war was not over. The hardest battles might still lie ahead. But for the first time, she could see a path to victory that did not end in mutual destruction. The Council had wanted to make an example of humanity. Instead, humanity had become an example of something else entirely. The galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was beginning to choose sides. 1 year and 3 days after humanity walked out of the peace negotiations on Varanthos Prime, the Galactic Council requested a meeting. The message arrived through diplomatic channels that had been silent for months. It was addressed to Ambassador Laura Mitchell and signed by Zelvareth himself. The High Speaker who had demanded human submission now asked, with carefully formal language, for an opportunity to discuss terms Laura read the message 3 times before allowing herself to believe it was real. Then she called a meeting of the War Council. Could be a trap, Admiral Kevin Brooks warned. They tried to trap us once before. The situation has changed, Hannah Price replied. She pulled up intelligence reports on the central display. The Council is fractured. The Veloxi have formally withdrawn from the war. The Tharkin are on the verge of civil conflict. The Morthani hive mind has experienced its first schism in recorded history. With nearly a third of their colonies refusing to acknowledge the central authority, even the Dravati are divided. The 17 species have signed the Silurian Declaration, Laura added. 17 species publicly committed to reforming or replacing the Council. This is not the same galaxy it was a year ago. President Daniel Hayes spoke from his secure location on Earth. The question is not whether we should meet with them. The question is what we demand when we do. The negotiations took place on a barren moon in neutral space, far from any world controlled by either side. It was a place chosen specifically because it belonged to no one. A symbolic acknowledgement that the old order had ended and something new had yet to take its place. Laura Mitchell arrived with a delegation of 12, representing not just humanity, but the growing alliance of species that had joined their cause. Ambassador Velith of the Silurians stood at her side, along with representatives of the Veloxi, the Tharkin, and 6 other species who had broken with the Council. Zelvareth arrived alone. The once mighty speaker had changed in ways that went beyond the physical. His crystalline form, which had once glowed with inner fire, now seemed dim and cracked. The arrogance that had radiated from him like heat was gone, replaced by something Laura had never expected to see in a Trav. Uncertainty they met in a simple chamber construct. Ed for this purpose, a dome of transparent material that showed the stars in every direction. There were no thrones, no platforms, no symbols of rank or power. Just 2 groups of beings facing each other across an empty space. You may state your terms, Zelvareth said. The words seemed to cost him something. Laura had prepared for this moment. She had written and rewritten her demands, consulted with allies, debated with advisors. But standing here now, facing the being who had tried to enslave her people, she found that her prepared speech no longer felt right. Before I state our terms, she said, I want to understand something. Why did you do it? You had peace. You had stability. The galaxy had known order for thousands of years. Why did you decide to threaten us? Why did you force this war? Zelvareth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Because you frightened us. Laura had not expected that answer. Frightened you? We were barely a footnote in galactic history. How could we possibly frighten the Dravati? You grew too fast. You learned too quickly. In 300 years, you went from burning coal for power to building starships. In the entire history of the galaxy, no species has ever advanced so rapidly. Zelvareth's crystal form flickered with emotions the translator could not interpret. We looked at your trajectory, and we saw where it would lead. In 1,000 years, you would surpass us. In 2000, you would rule the galaxy. We decided to stop you before that could happen. Hannah Price leaned forward. You started a war because you were afraid of what we might become. We started a war because we had been in power for so long that we could not imagine giving it up. We told ourselves it was for the good of the galaxy. We told ourselves you were dangerous and needed to be controlled. But the truth was simpler and uglier. We were afraid of being replaced. The admission hung in the air between them. Laura felt something shift in her chest. The anger she had carried for a year beginning to transform into something more complicated. Not forgiveness? Not yet. But understanding. I'm going to tell you our terms now, she said, and they may surprise you. She stood and walked to the center of the chamber, where holographic projectors displayed a map of the galaxy. Humanity does not seek conquest. We do not want your territories, your tribute, or your submission. What we want is simple. She touched the display, and the map transformed into a document written in a dozen languages. Recognition as equals. Full membership in a reformed galactic council, with voting rights based on contribution rather than age. an end to the caste system that ranks species by how long they have existed, and a mutual defense treaty that protects all member species from aggression, including aggression from within the Council itself. Zelvareth stared at the document. That is all? No, there is one more thing. Laura turned to face him directly. An acknowledgement of what happened. Not an apology. I do not think you are ready for that yet. But an acknowledgement that the Council made a mistake. That threatening young species is not the path to lasting peace. That the old way of doing things has failed. Could demand far more, Zelvareth said slowly. After what we did, what we tried to do, you would be justified in demanding our destruction. Your allies would support you. The Silurians especially would celebrate seeing the Dravati broken. Veleth's tentacles waved in what might have been agreement, but she remained silent. Perhaps Laura acknowledged, but humanity has learned something over our long and bloody history. We have fought wars of revenge. We have destroyed enemies who wronged us. And every time we discovered that vengeance only plants the seeds for the next war. We would rather build than destroy. We would rather create a future where this never happens again than punish the past. The negotiations continued for 7 days. There were arguments, compromises, moments when it seemed everything would fall apart. But in the end, an agreement was reached. The Treaty of Luna's Shadow, as it came to be known, reshaped galactic civilization in ways that would echo for millennia. The old council was dissolved. In its place rose a new federation of sovereign species, with humanity as one of its founding members. Young species that had been marginalized for ages found their voices. Technologies that had been suppressed were shared freely. The rigid hierarchy that had defined galactic life for 40,000 years gave way to something more flexible, more just, and more hopeful. 30 years later, Ambassador Laura Mitchell, long retired from public service, sat in her garden on Earth watching the sunset. A young journalist had come to interview her for a documentary about the war and its aftermath. Looking back, the journalist asked, "What do you think humanity's greatest achievement was?" Laura thought for a long moment. She thought about the battles, the losses, the friends who had not lived to see the peace. She thought about Zelvareth, who had eventually offered a genuine apology and had spent his remaining years working to undo the damage his species had caused. She thought about Veleth, who had become one of her closest friends and who still visited whenever their schedules allowed. Our greatest achievement, she finally said, was not winning the war. It was not defeating the Council or forcing them to the negotiating table. Our greatest achievement was what we did with the victory. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Human and alien vessels traveled those stars together now, exploring, building, creating something new. We showed them that strength is not about domination. Real strength is building something that outlasts you. Real strength is choosing mercy when you have every right to choose revenge. Real strength is walking away from a fight you could win because winning is not the same as being right. She smiled, and her eyes reflected the light of distant suns. We could have burned the galaxy. Instead, we rebuilt it. That is the human way. That has always been the human way. And now, maybe it is becoming the galactic way too. The journalist thanked her and departed. Laura remained in her garden as night fell, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, the future was being written by 1,000 different species working together in ways that had once been impossible. It was not a perfect future. There would be new conflicts, new challenges, new mistakes to make and learn from. But it was a future that belonged to everyone. Not just the strong or the old or the fortunate. It was a future worth fighting for, and it had begun with a single moment. 1 year and 3 days before the peace. When humanity had refused to bow and walked out of a room full of beings who had forgotten that the young can teach the old, just as surely as the old can teach the young, the galaxy had tried to make humanity kneel. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy to stand.